We've heard some very different perspectives and companies coming from a different history. Sanofi probably with the longest tradition of addressing international and some developing country markets. Merck, a very large company with also a long and rich history in pharmaceutical, relatively new in vaccines, and even newer in the globalization, and then Novavax with this more recent history. Before opening up for questions or topics from the delegates, I had one that I'd like to explore a little more. I heard a lot from all three speakers about the globalization, the emerging markets, and the needs to address them. Some of the comments were targeted towards the middle market, the middle income segments, and countries where there are middle income economies. There are also the developing economies, the poor parts of the global markets. How do we go about addressing them? There's a lot of talk about how do we reduce the trickle-down time, the 20 years that it often takes for a proprietary new product, a multivalent pneumococcal conjugate, or for that matter, a meningococcal conjugate, or others, to get into the less affluent parts of the world markets. How do we accomplish that? I'd like to hear your thoughts on it. Historically, there's been a great resistance to sharing manufacturing technology for a new large market product. Concerns that, if there was a secondary manufacturer and there was a problem, would it damage the market for the primary? So I'd just like to open that topic up to the panelists a little bit. All three of you, I think, have activities in the area.
I'll take a shot at this. Can you hear me on this? It's an interesting challenge, and again, I think Merck has been so much a kind of U.S. and through our JV European-focused company that it's an area that I think we're getting late to the game for the global market. But I think in some ways that may be an advantage because those emerging economies are changing so fast. I mean, and if you've been to China, or I've not personally been to India yet, but you can see it just really changing in front of your eyes almost. And I think one of the things that I think will help all of us is to get more clarity around some of both the regulatory requirements for getting vaccines onto the markets there, and then also to build up the expertise there for some of these critical components about, around manufacturing and quality control and those things. I think, what we are viewing too is that we need to start our clinical development really from the very early stages in those countries. We have tended to get the vaccines on the market in the U.S. and in Europe quickly, and then, as you say, it kind of takes time to trickle down. And I think a good example of that, two good examples, are hepatitis B and Hib, a vaccine you're very familiar with. So that, these products got on the market very early, but then by the time they actually got out to many of those other countries where a lot of the disease burden was years. And so I think one of the things that we're looking at now is, can we start those development programs, in parallel in those different countries at the same time that we're doing those in the U.S. Again, it's new territory, and I think as we're going into many of these countries, the regulatory experience is not there. Again, the things around CMC, quality control, those are in their infancy. And I think over the next 5 years, we're going to see a real evolution of that. But I think that the key is going to be to get there sooner and to help build up that expertise locally to make sure that the infrastructure is in place to really get them there.
So with regard to the hepatitis B and the transfer of the recombinant technology to manufacturers in China, that was a more mature product and maybe better understood. But nonetheless, if it is Merck technology in the product, How do you handle the issues of product identification? Are those identified as a separate product and not tied to the identity of Merck's own manufacturer?
For that particular one, that was the case. But I think, you know, we're looking more and more at, we want to, and I think even just from a commercial standpoint, some of the feedback we're getting is that in these markets, they want branded products. They want to see that. And again, I think what it speaks to is the quality controls and the type of product that it is. You know, for better or for worse, there have been some areas where there have been concerns about some local manufactured. And I think, again, we're viewing this as a good way for both parties to benefit. It gives us access to those markets, and it also helps bring them up to the quality standards that would allow them to inspire more confidence in the people getting those vaccines as well. So it's a real challenge. I mean, it really is.
So, Alan, you know, you've got a broader portfolio in some of those markets, and maybe ask you to include in your comments some thoughts about a product like the new dengue vaccine that you're developing. You know, it's fairly sophisticated technology, but a disease that, while it has a significant middle market, is probably also needed by some of the poorest in the world. Maybe I've seen some estimates of 400 million doses a year needed. Is it going to be feasible to have multiple manufacturing sites, including some in-country?
I think yes. I think it is possible to do that. I think a lot of the issue with regard to trickle down, which is where the conversation started, is rooted in history. I think a lot of companies initially built manufacturing capacities that were sized to meet the markets that were their home markets. And since we're either talking about European-based companies or we're talking about US-based companies, that's how the facilities were sized. But there wasn't a lot of excess capacity to go around, and that excess capacity had to be generated. And generally, it needed to be generated by optimizing the manufacturing capability so that you could get more doses out of the facility that was originally making fewer doses. In some cases, there was expansion, and in some cases, there was add-on to get additional capacity. But the concept of manufacturing for your home market made it very difficult to get vaccines into the emerging markets because there simply weren't the doses to go around. So that's one of the reasons I think that we see the trickle-down effect. And for certain vaccines, I think it's too late to avoid the trickle-down because, number one, it's already happened to many of them, and in others, it's in the process of happening. But I think the newer vaccines, and this was said earlier, the ones that are being developed which have global application, are vaccines where manufacturing is or can be sized appropriately so that you can put the product both into the emerging markets and into the developed markets at the same time. But it takes some thinking and planning and desire. And it's economies of scale that will help you in being able to simultaneously launch in both the developed markets and the emerging markets. So I think this is something that will be coming and that you're going to see in most of the new vaccines because all of the multinational companies that I know of and many of the biotech companies who are developing vaccine products are not just thinking about the developed markets anymore. They're thinking about both the emerging and the developed. The other part of your question, is it possible to duplicate manufacturing facilities globally to serve needs? I think the answer is absolutely. We're doing that right now with flu. We have manufacturing capacity in the United States right now for about 150 million doses of trivalent flu per year. We have about 110 million doses located in France. In addition to that, we have 25 expandable to 50 now in Shenzhen, China. We have 25 into Ocoyoacac in Mexico. And we have other sites which we're currently working on.
So when you manufacture a product for the same disease, and
Correct.
essentially the same indication, but in multiple sites, particularly multiple countries, are those, while branded, are they branded as distinct products for the same disease? I guess the question is, you know, anytime you have multiple manufacturing sites, whether within the same company or separate, you have the risk of divergence of product performance in some way. So they identified as Sanofi Pasteur, but under different brand names? How do you handle the issue of commonality or product divergence.
I'm missing the question. Are you saying the same product under a different branding, or?
Well, I'm saying an inactivated flu vaccine, which is manufactured in Pennsylvania versus one manufactured in France, both by Sanofi. They're both for the same disease. Yet, I think it's probably unrealistic to try to think they're going to be identical. Nor would it probably be economical to try to make them identical.
Right, that's again a situation, excuse me, which arises based on history. As you know, the facility that comes to us from France was originally part of the Institut Pasteur. That was developed using that process, and the facility that we have in Swiftwater comes to us through a difference. So we have Vaxigrip in one market, we have Fluzone in another market. They're both split flu, trivalent split flu. They both do the same thing, but the manufacturing processes, particularly on the back end, are different. Yes. There's a lot of logic to homogenizing those two things together if you plan from the beginning. But any time that you face a situation where you're growing through merger and acquisition, you're going to have to find ways to dovetail existing products, particularly if they're different products for the same indication. I think that will continue to be an ongoing challenge because I see more consolidation coming.
Yeah. John, your challenges are a little different in flu. Because of the pandemic risk, there's a national interest issue, and there's a history of nationalization of domestic source. I think one of the problems we've had is that there are only 6 countries, I think. At least a few years ago, there were only 6 countries in the world that had a domestic flu manufacturing capability. And yet, any country is going to restrict the export of product until its citizens are taken care of. How do you see the globalization of influenza vaccines? I realize that others here, particularly Sanofi, has a big presence there too, but this is your specialty.
That might be understating their presence, but that's okay.
But he has one flu vaccine. You've launched 2.
Novavax, for a small biotech company, has spent a fair and significant amount of time exploring emerging market opportunities, and I think the changes that we're seeing in the influenza market, especially around pandemic preparedness, has created an opportunity for us. And so as far as emerging market requirements, I think they're fairly unique country to country. And so if you look at the BRIC-M countries, we've spent a fair amount of time exploring each one of those countries. And so I've personally got to know the Indian market quite well over the last year, 6 or 7 trips over the last year, and understanding the opportunities and challenges there. Certainly there's a lot of optimism for growth and a lot of optimism for regulatory pathway, but it's far from clear and far from definitive. DCGI, India's FDA, has some unique challenges in working with them. How you file documentation, INDs, what requirements they have for clinical trials from other countries. They don't like very much first-in-human trials, especially for new technologies. From an infrastructure standpoint, I think that there's, again, a lot of upside, but you look at India and China in comparison, and Alan said it before in his presentation, you stand in Beijing and it's palpable. I mean, I was there 3 weeks ago for a conference. It's just bursting with opportunity. And the infrastructure is already there. The money is already flowing. There's a lot of strategy being defined in China ahead of where India is. And so, each presents a different set of needs and a different set of challenges. You look at Mexico, for example. We did a significant trial there around the pandemic, but again, couldn't get enough traction to move things along to a licensed product and ultimately creating a partnering in Mexico. But there's still great interest and great opportunity there. Same in Russia, same in Brazil, and you're seeing a lot of interesting dynamics play themselves out that are creating opportunities for companies like Novavax. But the regulatory pathway challenges, can be significant depending upon what product you're also taking to the table. And so if it's an established product in the marketplace and you're partnering with somebody in country and you're manufacturing in country, that actually lessens the burden to some degree, but creates some other unique challenges on its own.
Are there questions from the delegates that you'd like to launch at this point? Back in the corner here. There's a microphone coming. Please introduce yourself, your name, and your organization.
I'm George Waller from the College of Physicians in Philly. I'm asking the question because we do a lot of public health, and some of it's already been partially answered, but in light of the recent events in Japan, have any of you started looking more closely at your supply chain and thinking about redundancies, and can you afford to build redundancies into it?
Probably at this point more for Merck and Sanofi to talk about their.
It's an interesting question, and I think it does, the events in Japan highlight how intertwined the whole global supply chain is. I don't know that it has had a direct impact at this point, but I think it just highlights for all of us how interconnected we all are now. And so I think the short answer is that it's not had an immediate impact or immediate large impact, but that I think it makes us all look very carefully at that whole supply chain issue and think about it and how you will handle that. And I think, it also, even with different epidemics, and I think John really spoke to this well in terms of, in his talk of, you can't just move supplies from one country to another country at the drop of a hat. There's a lot of regulatory issues, a lot of other issues that you have to think about, going into those things. So I think it just has highlighted to us, how complex the world is right now with everything being so globally interconnected.
Alan, any additional comment on that?
Well, I was going to say, as things like what happened in Japan unfold, it adds a different factor that you have to take into consideration when you're planning supply. I don't think there's anybody that would intentionally build a manufacturing facility on a fault line, but you certainly would want to take geography into account. By and large, manufacturing now is located where companies establish their facilities. And I'm sure that there are environmental studies that are done that are sophisticated enough to take a look at fault line geographies and things like that. But by and large, if a company has a facility and it has space available, it's going to look to site its next manufacturing facility close, because it derives the benefit of some of the shared infrastructure, some of the shared utilities and things like that. But I think your point's a good one. It's certainly something that has to be taken into consideration. There are many things that are beyond our control. In fact, I'm frankly always amazed at how much natural disaster can alter the course of what people have planned. We have very, very grand designs, and we put a lot of sophisticated thought into many of the things that we do, but a natural disaster comes along and literally it wipes it away.
We don't always take great care in locating our facilities. I happen to live a few miles from the world's first mile-long linear accelerator, aligned by laser beam, and it spans the San Andreas Fault. Mm-hmm. So there are a few notable examples. Another interesting...
Just one more thing that I would say is that I've seen, we did mention the fact that it's difficult to move products from one country to another because of the regulatory situation, and that's true. But generally, in times when there's an emergency, there is some relaxation in that standard because the risk-benefit equation shifts. And so it is possible to get medicines and to get vaccines to these patients. And having watched videos now of whole villages being washed away by this tsunami, there's going to be a lot of the kind of disease that you would normally not encounter in this region. So there will be medication, there will be vaccination. It's in process now.
Just a sort of an observation, and I haven't updated to know if this is still the case, but I know for many, many years and up to very recently, most, if not all, of the Bordetella pertussis vaccine bulk actually is manufactured in Japan, imported to the U.S., and formulated into the vaccines that are routinely used in the U.S. Market. So there is a global interdependency. Maybe when you're looking at an intermediate like that, larger reserves can be kept. And of course, the pandemic flu was a great example of how we could shorten the pathways to licensing and getting supplies of vaccines from international suppliers. So there are good examples. Additional question here?
Hi, Wayne Rudolph from BeyondVax. Two questions actually for John. Firstly, congratulations on really executing your strategy and setting a good example for other smaller biotechs to follow. Just one question on your pathway through to market for your influenza vaccines. If you could just tell us a bit more about how quickly you think that you could get through into phase 3 and then onto the market, and how you see that happening. And then secondly, given the BARDA contract and also your regional partnering strategy, what role is there, if any, left for a large pharma partnership that you suggested that you were still looking for?
First, thanks very much. Appreciate the comment. The pathway right now, at least for the U.S., is established by the BARDA contract, and so we've publicly disclosed that we'll be entering into a phase 2 dose-confirming trial later on this year for the seasonal program, moving to end of phase 2 meeting early next year, phase 3 meeting hopefully late Q3 in time for the 2012 season. Would expect launch 2014, BLA filing late 13, early 14. Knowing that a lot of the countries we're partnering with are dependent upon U.S. licensure, so the wheels are already spinning for some regulatory kickoff in India as well as in Korea. And so likely some of you know that those will start, but then wait for U.S. licensure and then have likely a phase 3 with in-country manufactured material. At least that's our strategy. So we see that timeline happening very much in sync with one another, and that same strategy would play itself out if we do other partnering. The second question is a really good one, is you're constantly balancing your regional strategy of partnering with a major market partner, or at some point even considering a worldwide partnership. And does partnering regionally dilute the value of that worldwide partnership? And well, we're trying to walk that line very carefully, obviously. We think that the markets that so far that we've entered in require good, strong local partners anyway. And so we don't think that we're giving up that much by the partnership that we have in India, certainly in the joint venture, same in Korea, and as we look at other BRIC-M countries, I think likely the same. The one that's obviously gets the exclamation point is China. So maybe that's a little bit of the pot-banging strategy of which comes first, a China deal or a large partner deal. That will remain to be seen. And so, you got to execute your strategy to success. You can't execute a strategy to partner. And ultimately, the partner will come along if you execute to success. So that's our intent.
So it's the counterpart to what we heard from the large pharma companies. Identify your objectives and then go about a gap analysis and look at how to achieve those objectives. So in your case, it's really looking for the partners.
Lance, I'd like to, if it's okay, I'd like to ask a question to John. In a situation where you're a company and you're partnering out to multiple partners, and you want to make sure that your product has consistent characteristics, do you put any safeguards in place to make sure that the work being done by one partner and the work being done by the other partner fit together, so that the data is always supportive of your product?
Yeah, and that goes a little bit back to the question that Lance asked before about consistency in manufacturing across different manufacturing sites and different licensees. I'll say it from a business perspective. I'm not a technical guy, but there's definitive tech transfer plans that are in place to those entities, and I think in particular when you're looking at in-country manufacturing, you're licensing that technology to someone who's going to manufacture it at a facility in that country. And so we don't ultimately expect that product would be identical facility to facility. But we do expect that the initial tech transfer and then ongoing tech transfer would maintain those key elements to ultimately what the foundational product technology looks like. So the construct of the recombinant VLP is going to be identical. The variability is going to be in manufacturing, right, which is not something that we're going to be able to control ultimately, but that we hope to embed in at least some of the tech transfer. So that ends up becoming the difference between whether you choose to do a joint venture
That's right.
or you choose to do an out-license. In the case of a joint venture, you get some benefits by retaining ownership to the entity, but now you have also a responsibility to make sure that what's executed gets executed consistently. So there becomes the trade-off between whether you do what we did in India, which was a joint venture, or you do what we did in Korea, which was an out-licensing. I think likely the out-licensing becomes probably the more appealing pathway as you do more of these.
There's a lot of trade-offs in what we've been discussing here. When you have multiple manufacturing sites owned by the same company but in different countries, for instance, you still have ultimate control over the product, and you can go a lot closer to assuring that it actually is the same and get rid of the risks of adverse events with one product or one site versus another. When it's through or out-licensed to another party, again, there's an issue of what the terms are, but do you retain a degree of control over the product, or is it truly become their product and they evolve it the way they have it? And that gets to the issue of branding, too. And as Michael said, some countries I think it was Michael, is preferring branded products. And these are very different strategies. We may have time for, say, one more question. Is there a burning one out here? A question over on the far side, and if there's time, one in front. Could you reintroduce yourself, please?
Yes, Naveen Anand from Prevent in Canada. How do you handle differential pricing in these markets? Because we've talked about multiple sites, sometimes being supplied out of the same site, and as the vaccine market in China, India, et cetera, grow, what would you do about pricing? Because the price points, and how will you get there? Any comments?
I'm not sure.
Differential pricing, it gets to the question, sort of these expanding global markets, what
In
you
the
might
different
sell.
countries?
For instance, a dengue product. Let's consider the first tier market, maybe the US and European travelers and military. Second tier market, some of the, partially emerged economies, shall we say. And then the third being the most impoverished countries. How do we get the products out? You can't afford to donate everything, although I'm sure that a lot of the NGOs would like that. How do you handle pricing that actually facilitates the implementation where it's needed?
Generally, pricing that we try to put forth is based on the pharmacoeconomic valuation of the product. So it's based on studies in terms of what the medical benefit is actually going to be to the product or to the patient that's using the product. We don't use cost-plus based manufacturing formulas. We try to make sure that we price the market based on the value that it's providing. Now, if the question is what do you do with different kinds of pricing in different markets, such as developed world pricing versus emerging world pricing, then it again depends on what the pharmacoeconomic benefit is going to be within each of the countries that you're going to be selling the product in. And I can say the product pricing is the most, as far as I'm concerned, it's the most challenging and the most sophisticated calculation that you do in commercializing your products, because there are certain price points that are acceptable, there are certain price points that are unacceptable. If you take a look, for example, at the program that's out there now with Pneumo, which gets products like Prevnar into the market, you'll find that they're heavily subsidized. And they were initially subsidized at a level of about $7 a dose. They will finally be subsidized at a level of $3.50 per dose. And at some point in time, the subsidies will drop away. So if this kind of incentive is necessary to drop product down, is this me? I'm sorry.
You're doing well.
If this kind of process is necessary in order to get the pricing down to the point where it's workable for the economies that Pneumo 13 is going to go into, then It's going to be challenging, because I can tell you that when you take a look at the cost of manufacture of a product that is 13 conjugates put together, I spent 8 years at Wyeth when we were developing first the 4-valent and then the 7-valent Prevnar. It becomes very, very challenging, and I personally question whether a 13-valent conjugate can be manufactured in a single dose for the prices that are being talked about in the Gavi-supported countries.
I think the answer is it is a huge challenge. It's value-based, it's economy-based, and some products or versions of products simply may not be available. The cost of manufacture may be prohibitive, and we do have certainly some solid examples in many years' history with, for example, a wholesale pertussis vaccine in much of the world, and a site or another. We have the single-dose presentations, preservative-free, in the more affluent markets versus the multi-dose in other markets. So, unfortunately, there is a differentiation, not always what we'd like, but certain realities of the world. Mike, additional questions?
Well, no, I think Alan summarized it very well, and I think, there's also the complexities of the public market versus the private market in many of these areas, and then I think you also have to look at what both, governments and different non-government agency, things like what's the effect of Gavi, the Gates Foundation, in trying to change some of the economics there. I think there's, it's a lot of very creative things going on. So I think the bottom line is, as Lance really said, it's very complex, and in many ways it depends on which market you're talking about and which product you're talking about. It's a very, very complicated formula, I think, that you have to go through to settle on that.
I certainly think one encouraging answer to the dilemma posed is what we heard in terms of hepatitis B, and also some of the manufacturing transfer that we heard from Alan, where in-country manufacture can be much lower cost. So that's at least for some products a solution. I think we can take a minute. Did you have a question up here?
Well, yes. I'll take half a minute for the question, and half a minute I'll give you for answer. First of all, I would like to compliment all the three speakers. I think this was an excellent piece of presentation that we heard, and we had a very good panel session. The question is to Michael. You mentioned about the royalty stacking for multiple product in licensing. Would you like to elaborate a little bit on that?
I'm sorry, could you clarify the question?
On
Multiple licenses in different products?
Yeah, royalty stacking.
Yeah, well, I mean, again, it depends on the specific product, and I can't really go into some of the details because of confidentiality on some of these, but some of these products have multiple licenses that may go back to the antigen itself, the process for producing the antigen, some of the basic technology that was used in the discovery of the antigen. Sometimes there's patents on the bioprocess for producing it. So, for some products, these can form, almost a quarter of the value of the molecule that go into that. So, different products, have different ones, but I think especially with vaccines, and probably, monoclonals fall in the same way, where there's been so much of the technology that's been patented. There's so many different fingers in the pie, so to speak, that it's very complex to get the deal, to actually get that product put together. And I think everybody's had that experience where, we're all working together, but everybody wants to make sure, and rightly so, that they get the credit and the reward for their contribution to making those products. And so I think the days are gone when, one company is going to just soup to nuts, make everything from the very beginning and have a product. I think everything now has got so many different pieces. It's almost like an iPod or a, a computer where nobody can say, yeah, I discovered and made this. It's like I'm the final assembler of a product that came from many different pieces. And in some ways, I think the iPhone is just basically an Apple logo that's put onto things that, hundreds of other companies have contributed to. And I think in many ways that's where we're getting into, especially in the vaccines and biologics arena. It's very complicated.
This just a little tangential comment here. When you have products that have multiple technologies in them, the negotiation of the value of that product becomes very, very difficult, because each of the contributing organizations that provides technology sees their technology as enabling technology. And they'd like a certain, let's say you get commercial success and you're talking about royalties, they want a certain royalty level. I stepped into a situation about, 7 or 8 years ago where people told me, we've got some nice technology with regard to cancer vaccines. And I said, tell me about it. I looked at it and they were carrying 37 to 40% royalty loads. And I said, is this really the way you want to commercialize a product? And, well, we have all the technology we need. I don't see why we can't do it. And I said, well, okay, what's the cost of manufacture going to be? And at that point, the cost of manufacture was estimated to be on the order of potentially 40%. You take a 40% royalty, you put marketing and sales against it, and you already have a negative equation before you've even developed the product. So it's a relatively sophisticated mix. It's very much of a spin-off from the answer that was given, which was the answer to the question, but it is a level of complexity that comes into these very sophisticated vaccines which we're developing now. And I think all of you know that the relatively simple, straightforward vaccines are few and far between right now. Yeah. The vaccines that are being developed are quite complex. They're multi-component, they're multi-technology. In order to put these together in such a way that you can have a product which shows profitability and also serves the emerging markets is an equation that a lot of us are struggling with.
And then you take everything they said and factor in that during the course of product development, you tend to accumulate proprietary technologies. Yeah. So once you're already marginally commercially viable with the accumulated royalties, what do you do with the next one that...
Well, I think one good example, just of how it used to be, and I'll just kind of close it with this, that, our mumps vaccine that's included in our MMR product it's called the Gerald Lynn strain of mumps. And Gerald Lynn was Maurice Hilleman's daughter. Mm-hmm. And, Gerald Lynn, she was, I think, 4 years old at the time. She came down with mumps. Right. Dr. Hilleman took her into the lab, swabbed her throat, stuck it in the culture, and developed a vaccine from that. Yep. That's how it was in the good old days. Those days are gone. Nobody, there's not going to be anybody that develops a novel vaccine by that method at this point. I think it's, we're all too interconnected to do that.
Well, I'm kind of proud to say that it might have been the last one within the company, but when we launched the first conjugate vaccine, the HIB, we had no royalties. But now there's a lot of royalties in that field and a lot of compound technologies. Well, listen, I appreciate all of your diligence in staying through this. We've gone 5 minutes into our lunch break. We're recovering the 5 minutes that people had their extended dating in the previous break. So thank you very much, and I appreciate the panelists' participation.